I'm going to go ahead and hop right into this topic because it's been weighing pretty heavy on my spirit. So I'm not going to do an intro for this video today, but I want to talk about the power of discernment and how important it is for you to listen to your intuition and listen to your gut. And the reason why I felt compelled to even speak about this, because I was actually going to take a break from making content for at least a few days. But shout out to everyone who is active on my TikTok page. And I appreciate you all so much because you guys keep me up to date with things that are going on. And I've been seeing a lot of people tag me in stories on my TikTok about individuals who are unfortunately at the receiving end of envious attacks. And these aren't, minuscule envious attacks. It's pretty dangerous. There was one young lady who was a business owner that someone tagged me. And I guess someone came and attacked her at her place of business. Another woman who was actually a victim of an acid attack, and her image is actually included in this video here today. And the woman's name was Jasmine. And another lady who was unfortunately, I'm not sure if I could say this word, but drugged on her birthday trip in Mexico. And her video is also included in this analysis as well, or excuse me, not her video, but her picture. And I'm realizing that this epidemic, it's almost becoming more and more intense. And my hypothesis is the fact that people still aren't familiar with some of the red flags, some of the signs of envy. And one thing that I keep trying to drive home is you differentiating someone who is simply, battling with feelings of insecurity, maybe even some fleeting feelings of comparison. You could take that lightly. But once a person has shown you a pattern of harboring envious feelings and tendencies towards you, you have to start implementing protective measures. And I'm actually going to read from the insight excerpt in the book to describe a little bit more what is meant by discernment. And the excerpt reads, the first step when dealing with envious individuals is to develop insight. Insight is defined as the capacity to gain an accurate and deep intuitive understanding of a person or thing. If one is unable to perceive when an individual is envious of them, then they are at a disadvantage concerning the envious individual's tactics. So that excerpt is really important because what it was getting at, as stated in the book, if you're unable to perceive the envious person's attacks, it's going to become difficult for you to even implement protective measures. So with that being said, that's why I'm always plugging certain resources to help people who aren't necessarily familiar with terminology such as discernment and insight, because the resource provides concrete examples that you can follow to help you become aware of these red flags, especially if at this point in time, you're in an environment where you're outnumbered by envious persons. Envious people, especially if they're moving in packs, if they realize that they have an advantage regarding quantity, they are going to go above and beyond with their projection and gaslighting tactics so that they can keep weakening your defenses, and so you won't be able to implement a course of action to protect yourself. But nevertheless, the reason why I wanted to talk about this phenomenon today is because there are instances where your discernment is leading you. And what I mean by that is there are moments where you'll have some kind of reaction and you can't necessarily put your finger on why you're having this kind of resistance, why you feel uneasy when you get invited to go somewhere, or when you're thinking about including this person in your birthday gathering at a birthday party and you feel a little bit of that resistance. A lot of the time, what we do is, and this is why I feel like now I'm leading more towards the spiritual, because there might be a need to dissect this a little bit more. But a lot of the time, our flesh, for lack of better words, our flesh will go into this habit of trying to reason and logic because we're basing it off of what is in our immediate environment at that point in time. But the beautiful thing about your discernment is your discernment goes ahead of you. Your discernment isn't going to give you the details because it hasn't happened yet. What it's doing is it's giving you a trigger warning before the fatal incident. So I also, when I was compiling images for this video, I started to look at a lot of the images of Selena Quintanilla, for example, and obviously her attacker. And I realized that there were instances where she was smiling, and it seemed like they were bonding. But there's one particular image, and this is actually going to be the image included in the thumbnail, where Selena, and I'm going to hypothesize this, I could be wrong, but Selena, from her face when she was looking at her perpetrator, her attacker, excuse me, that you can almost see that there was some kind of a shift. It was a shift in her body language. It was a shift in her facial expressions. Now, I could be, drawing my own hypothesis regarding this, but I couldn't help but realize that difference. And even for those of you who actually did watch Selena's movie, the Selena movie, and Selena found out about the fact that this person had already betrayed her and started to dabble into her finances and attempted to weaken her credibility with her fan base. Mind you, this person came into her life under the pretense of being a fan. And it was only to get up under her and to demolish and destroy everything that Selena built from the ground up. And it was because it started out with her admiring characteristics about Selena, but once she had access to it, that envy got out of control. I strongly encourage you all to study Selena Quintanilla's case, because this was a classic example of envy. But nevertheless, once Selena had concrete proof, tangible evidence that this person had betrayed her, that was really the last straw. There was no reconciliation at this point. There was no talking it out. But what does an envious person do? And I've been talking about this in my lives lately. I've talked about this in previous videos in the past. Envious people are always going to fight for access to their target. Why is it? Because if the target catches wind of what they're up to and they implement a course of action, two things are going to go through the envious person's mind. For one, it's going to be desperation. They're going to be on a desperate attempt to regain that access, because without a host, like a parasite, they can't survive. And their target of envy is their host. Secondly, and this is something that's not talked about, secondly, an envious person, once their target separates access, their feelings of offense are going to rise to the surface. They're going to be offended at the fact that you caught on to them and you move differently. So it's going to be a fight, a relentless pursuit of getting you back, because it's a flood of all of these emotions of essentially loss. I lost my host and I also lost the upper hand. And what is the envious person's upper hand? You not perceiving their tactics. So there are some situations where your discernment is going to go ahead of you. And that's why I referenced that picture of Selena. And if you pay attention to all the other pictures where her and her perpetrator were together, she was smiling, they were laughing. But that one picture where her hair is up in a bun and she's wearing that beautiful black dress, and her perpetrator is wearing white and she's looking down at her, I feel like that those are instances that we often overlook. And here's the dangerous thing about it too. What we sometimes put up resistance against is, well, I've never felt this way before, so maybe I'm tripping. No, there's a reason why your body is reacting the way that it is at this point in time. Because as I've talked about recently, even in the most recent video that I posted, I believe it was a short, where I had to revisit the stages of envy section. And I initially talked about it on my TikTok, but the stages of envy excerpt in the book Green Eyes, where I was highlighting the fact that envy is a byproduct of sequential stages. Once a person gets to that point of no return, my hypothesis genuinely is that your body will start to react to it. You will start rejecting this person. And this is how you end up in situations where when you go against that discernment, when you go against your better judgment, your greater judgment, that last meetup was always it felt like a point of no return. It was the most disrespectful thing that they said. They humiliated you. They put you in harm's way. It was something to where you had no choice but to sever ties. But the beautiful thing about your discernment is it will protect you before you even get to that compromising position. And another thing that stands out to me too is you have to be prepared to implement a boundary with somebody that you probably don't want to, because an envious individual is always closest to you. Always. The envious person is always closest to you. And I'm not just talking about like your more intimate and immediate relationships, but it can even be in a professional capacity. It's the person who's bogging you down with emails. It's the person who's bogging you down with messages. And it's because they're trying to not only attain that access if they feel like that they have successfully attained it, now they're on the fight to sustain it. An envious person is not somebody who's distant and in the shadows. An envious person is right up under your nose. And the reason why I wanted to pinpoint that proximity piece, someone being really close to you who often harbors feelings of envy towards you, is because oftentimes that idea or that concept of proximity, being so familiar with this person, is why you're putting up a resistance with listening to your discernment, with following your intuition. Especially once you start to feel that sudden switch up of, why do I not trust this person anymore? Or why, when I'm around them, all of a sudden now I feel uneasy? Why is it that when they give me advice, I don't feel compelled to trust it? I don't feel compelled to take it, even though all these years I've been listening to their advice and it's been working, or maybe I've just been listening to it and I've been able to get by. But now all of a sudden, I just feel like I have to start putting my guard up with this person. It's for a reason. And oftentimes it's because their envy has reached a point of no return. They're officially a lost cause. And I'm going to give you all a few examples of instances in my life where my discernment was leading me and the consequences of me not following it, right? Not being obedient to that discernment, because your discernment is a gift. God doesn't have to give you a forewarning. I want people to let that really sink in. We don't have to get a heads up regarding anything. But we serve a God who loves us enough to protect us and to give us that forewarning ahead of time. But nevertheless, there was an instance where at this point in my life, I was surrounded by so much counsel, and it's because my spirit felt compelled to do this strategically. Godly counsel, let me be specific. And at the same time, what I was pursuing, what I was involved in, even though at the surface it seemed like it was a good thing, but there was a conflict and I couldn't put my finger on why there was so much of a resistance. And nevertheless, as we were doing deliverance, I actually got so sick to the point that I threw up. And in my spirit, I felt like, what is going on? My body was rejecting something. And during that time frame, I had received an invitation from a group of ladies who were already giving me a lot of confusion. It was a lot of he say, she say, a lot of discord. And even though there were a lot of inconsistencies, and this is why I'm always driving this point home as well, when you pick up on someone's, hot and cold tendencies, that hot and cold characteristic, oftentimes what it's doing is it's creating confusion in your mind and in your emotional state on purpose, because it's going to weaken your defenses by default. And for people who are believers, you already know that we understand scripture when it says God is not the author of confusion. So if God isn't the author of confusion, then who is? So when you find yourself dealing with someone who is blowing hot and cold, and their behavior, it's here one day and then it's here the next day, they're doing that intentionally because they're banking on you becoming emotionally and mentally unstable, and then it becomes easier to dictate how they want to control you. So nevertheless, back to my personal story or my personal testimony. When I went back to that group, that was the final straw. What happened? It was so ridiculous, so uncalled for. And all I thought about was when I was in a deliverance session and my body had that reaction to where I threw up. That was my body warning me, if you keep going about this way, you're going to face a consequence. I know some people are just like, well, how did the two come together? Well, it was the thought that came to me once I felt really, really sick. And all of the puzzle pieces just came together for me. And I genuinely believe that was my body having a physical reaction to what my discernment was warning me of ahead of time. There was another instance where, I just saw something and it was very quick. Like I was just sitting and, sometimes you could have like a flash of a memory or whatever. But I saw an individual who was in my environment at the time. All of this is a professional capacity, by the way. And I was lured into an environment, and all of these people just started to stab me multiple times with sharp objects. And I was like, whoa, why did I see that? Fast forward a couple months later, I went through the ultimate betrayal in that setting, where a whole plan was devised to get me up out of there nothing substantial to stand on. And I was like, wow, that's what that thing that I saw, that's what it was about. It was symbolic of what was about to happen. Then there was another instance that happened to me recently, but see, now I'm implementing some common sense in this phase of my life, right? So I felt off about something once I got an invitation. It's actually been a couple of instances in the past year where that has happened. I felt off about certain invitations. I felt off about certain instructions that I've been given to go back to places that God has already delivered me from. And it's not just a matter of, oh, well, I just feel, weird this day. No, it was consistent patterns that I sat with. Every time I took heed to that instruction, to what my discernment was picking up on, the person would show their hand. And I want y'all to start paying attention. People will start showing their hands to you. This is the realm of discernment. See, when you're operating in your flesh, I know I'm speaking spiritually here, so I'm sorry for y'all who don't understand what I mean by that. But for those who do understand, just give them some kind of explanation in the comments to help them out if we have any people who are lost. But when you're operating in your flesh, you're waiting on the bad thing to happen. And then it's after the bad thing happens that you're just like, oh, that was that thing that I picked up on. Once you start operating in your discernment, you're ahead of the game. You're 10 steps ahead of the game. And that's where I want you all to be. That's why I plug these resources so that you guys have concrete examples if you do feel like you struggle in this area. Because it's okay. For a lot of us, it took heavy lessons and it took time. But if you can get ahead of the game, I strongly encourage you to. But once you start operating in your discernment, you're going to be 10 steps ahead of the envious person. And it's not until you resist their attempt to attack you that they're going to start showing their hand to you. And it's in that moment that they show their hand that you're going to be like, that's what I was picking up on. I couldn't put my finger on it and I didn't have proof at that point in time, but that's what I was picking up on. And that's the sweet spot to be in. We have to normalize staying 10 steps ahead of envious people, because if not, it can lead to fatal incidents or a situation where you are scarred for life, even if not physical, emotionally and mentally scarred, spiritually scarred. And you could have avoided it if you would have just listened to your discernment. And another instance that I was thinking about, and honestly, I've been thinking about this for the last few days, just randomly seeing certain things and, thinking about certain concepts. And the concept of Stockholm syndrome. And ironically enough, I was speaking to my mother about this, about a completely different story. And then a day later, I ended up watching a video, and it was a spiritual video. And the woman has said the same thing. She mentioned Stockholm syndrome. And I want people to understand this. And I have another video where I highlighted Meghan Markle. And the video is along the lines of like, disrespect is grounds for departure. A lot of you all are operating from this mindset, and I get it. It's because that's what we've been conditioned to believe as society, that you staying in certain spaces that have disrespected you or that have put you in harm's way is showing them that you are resilient and you have tenacity. And I want people to understand that a lot of the time that's actually you operating in Stockholm syndrome. You are enabling your abusers when you prolong your presence in toxic spaces. They don't view it as taking a stance and getting to the finish line. They don't view it that way. They view it as, we got another one. We successfully broke another person's spirit and confidence down. Because they interpret you staying around them. And as I get older, I understand this now. They interpret you staying around them, going above and beyond to prove yourself and prove your worth to people who have already disrespected you, who have already counted you out. They take that as, you were more concerned about our approval than you actually doing something constructive with your time and with your purpose. So with that being said, thinking back to something that one of you all, a commenter, put under one of my videos some time ago, we have to be careful with misplaced and misguided resilience. Your resilience should be reserved for spaces, for people, for, relationships that are actually constructive to your advancement and to your overall well-being. That resilience, those gifts, your purpose, your talents is not meant for individuals who are constantly trying to diminish it. And I know a lot of you all have been talking to me about realizing that a lot of these envious tendencies, these envious traits have been prevalent within your family members. And I think that that kind of ties into the point that I made earlier in this video about how the person who is the most envious of you is typically not a stranger. The person who is the most envious of you is someone who is right up under you. And that's why I love that that person tagged me on TikTok in that video talking about admiration is not envy. And for those who aren't familiar with the TikTok page, I also posted it on my YouTube where I stated that admiration is not always envy, or like admiration, at least it's something along those lines. But where I reread the excerpt in the book that dissects, the sequential phases of envy and how admiration is the first step. But if people aren't able to, properly process those feelings of admiration, then it can easily lead to someone becoming envious of another individual. And I genuinely believe that Selena's case is a spot on example of that. I do believe that her perpetrator started out idolizing Selena. And then once she got that immediate access, it started to lead to feelings of resentment and bitterness that it wasn't her. And that constant reminder is what led to the unthinkable. And it also made me think about this concept of envious people often blowing hot and cold. And a lot of the time it's intentional and it's meant to weaken your defenses and create confusion. But the flip side of the coin is a lot of the time they can't help it. Because in theory, when they're apart from you, they feel like they can handle that access. But once they actually get that intimate access, they can't handle the favor of your life. It irritates them. It bothers their spirit. And that's why they end up sabotaging it. And then they go away for some time and then they go back because they keep thinking in theory when they're separated from their target. And once they get that access again, that favor begins to irritate them and irk them. So when you are the target, even though you may feel compelled to, second guess your intuition, second guess your discernment, or you start to feel bad, you have to understand that those are your intentions. You have genuine intentions. You have a pure heart when it comes to this person. This person is showing you consistently that they don't operate the same way when it comes to you. And you don't owe this person reconciliation. You don't owe them access once they burnt that bridge with you. And just to close out, another thing that I want people to understand is this. Sometimes your discernment is warning you because this person is constantly around you. The book also talks about this individual, this type of envious person, who has essentially established a trauma bond with their target of envy. And they do this by seemingly being there for them at all times in the face of trouble. This person is always present when the person that they're envious of is going through a really difficult time or they're in dire need of something. This type of envious person is also dangerous because they don't mind leading with generosity. But what a lot of people have to understand is this. There are some people who are gauging and monitoring ill intentions that they've set out for you. There are certain things that people wish in their heart will happen to you. They wish that you will break up with your partner. They wish that you will fail. They wish that your business will collapse. They're wishing these things and they stay connected to you, or in the face of those events, they're constantly there to help you and console you, but you don't know that they're the culprit for it because their negative intentions and their negative energy, as long as they've attached themselves to you, it's now manifesting in your life. And I know a lot of people are just like, well, how could that happen? Like I believe in something more positive. And yes, but what does the scripture say? Bad company corrupts good character, meaning that there are instances where we are walking in agreement with our enemy. And there's another scripture that talks about, can two walk together unless they be agreed? This is why as believers, we have to sharpen up. And this is why I feel compelled to really hone in on this discernment point. We've been given tools as believers to pick up on the fact that no, when someone has shown you their hand, you're not supposed to keep them in your camp because they're showing you that you two are walking on two completely different paths. You have good intentions for them. They hate you and they want to see you fall off the face of this earth. How can you all keep walking together unless one of you align with one of the other's path? If you all want me to elaborate on this topic more, I'll be glad to. Just let me know in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I look forward to speaking to you guys in the next one. Take care, babes.